Welcome to Connecting the Dots, an Amici podcast presented by me, George Mingozzi-Marsh, where each episode I meet with an artist and chat about their community, collaborations, and how these connections continue to shape the artists they are today. In this episode, I'm speaking with artist and Project Artworks co-founder Kate Adams. Project Artworks is an internationally recognised collective based here in Hastings who work at the intersection of art and care, creating conditions for neurodivergent artists and artists with complex support needs to work both independently and collaboratively. I first became aware of their work through their Turner Prize nomination in 2021, and I got to know Kate and the team more closely when we all moved in here at the recently renovated 12 Claremont building in Hastings, us on the top floor and then below us in the ground floor gallery. It's a building which, as we discuss, Kate actually has quite a long history with. In this conversation, we talk about the origins of Project Artworks, how the organisation grew from Kate's own experience as an artist and as a mother, and how her role as artist, curator and facilitator overlap within the work she does today. And if you're watching the video version of this conversation at Amici.Art, at the end I'll share some footage of Project Artworks artist Christopher Tite producing the paintings for his exhibition In Threes, which formed the backdrop for our conversation, and also a beautiful video artwork by Kate.
We're in the new-ish Project Artworks gallery space in 12 Claremont, so just below Amici Studio as part of this kind of new cultural community in 12 Claremont. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about your history with this building and the studio you used to have on the top floor where Amici Studio is. And if we could kind of take you back a little bit to your kind of artistic practice before Project Artworks and then those sort of first steps into starting Project Artworks.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I built a practice after leaving college, university, and it was fairly interrupted because I had my first child when I was 22 and my second when I was 23.
Okay.
So then there was a quite patchy period of making that continued through.
I think most parents can kind of sympathise with that.
Totally. And I hadn't really got going, I guess, when I had the kids. But what was interesting, I felt, was how, nevertheless, your kind of creative drive sits there really tightly curled until a point where it can get going. And I think began to find my feet a bit when I did an MA where my second child, Paul, was about 6, and I did an MA, and I was really interested in, because Paul had been diagnosed, well, not really diagnosed, but he'd been identified as having profound learning disability. He was autistic, and there was a sort of quite a negative prognosis. I was really interested in understanding where we as human beings sat, first of all, within this macro, these ideas of the universe and this sort of cosmic scale against human scale. And I was very interested in the sort of comfort I found in that perspective. So I made quite a lot of work about that, mainly constructions and boxworks at the time.
When you were kind of looking at that macro, was that as a way of kind of understanding what you were starting to understand was happening with your son? Or was it kind of separate to that or predating that?
It was very much related to how to manage, how to adjust, how to cope with grief, how to understand, I guess, try to find a way to live. With a different perspective on our human dimension. And that was, really important to be able to.
Because one of the things, I mean, and maybe we'll touch on it later, but I suppose when you're in that care situation, your world can become very small.
I think I've always felt that the extraordinary privilege of being pitched into this fateful life situation, it was just, as I said to you, I think that it was more of an expansive experience than a reductive one. But there was a lot to cope with, obviously. And so I think I just processed some of it through making and reading, the relationship between making and reading. And I read I read H.G. Wells' Short History of the World, and I just loved the way that he described the record of the rocks and the this within a sort of 1.20 meter scale. The top 8 millimeters was human development. And so I made a boxwork about that. And it just helped. It helped me a lot spiritually to understand that perspective.
So this stage, just post MA, you were living in Hastings then? And is that when you took on the studio upstairs at that kind of stage, or did you have another studio before that?
Oh, no. So after, when I'd finished my MA, I took over the studio in 94, so 2 years after finishing. And I met John Cole, who had rented the whole of the top floor from a private landlord. And he just said there was a space at the front if I wanted to use it. So we shared a studio.
Amazing.
John Cole was an extraordinary painter. Yeah, he had, I think he'd won the Young Contemporaries a few years before. And he was also teaching at Hastings College on the foundation course, and so was I. So we met that way.
Okay, so you were kind of peers and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And was it up there that you started thinking about what would become kind of project artworks, sort of working with people outside of your own direct practice and doing these? Because it started off as a series of workshops, is that right?
Yeah. So John met my son Paul, and I think he was very sort of struck by him, seduced by him, because Paul's incredibly beautiful. And he's also extraordinarily direct and honest in the way that he interacts, and still is. He's 43 now, which is extraordinary. This week, in fact. And I and my husband Tony, who's a painter, who introduced me to John, actually, that we'd done a program of therapy with Paul for about 5 years, working with people from the local community as volunteers. We'd gone down to an organisation called the British Institute for Brain Injured Children, and it was an interesting program of therapy that was really about sensory stimulation and finding ways to bypass damaged areas of brain through enabling the child to go through what would be normal stages of physical development. Anyway, it was a very intensive program of therapy. I'm not sure I would do it now, but at the time, I think it was really important to do for us because it was a way of finding our way back to Paul from this sort of litany of quite horrendous prognoses. And John and I spoke about this a lot. And I also visited an exhibition at Paul's school at that time. And there were 8 different kids in his class, all with different natures, personalities, spirit, abilities. And this little exhibition that they put together were of artworks. They were all the same. And it struck me so profoundly how I understood what was possibly going on there, in that it was really good that the class were exploring creativity. There was a sort of feeling that these kids needed to make things look like art.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's like, Easter cards used to come home with, I made this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so interesting. So you were searching for a kind of more, maybe not honest, but more kind of expressive, maybe rooted way of working with these.
Yeah, and John and I had a lot of conversations about it because he was an exceptional painter and also exceptionally engaged and brave, very sort of vital person. So we hatched this plan I knew the head teachers of 2 schools that were Glyne Gap School near Bexhill and in Eastbourne Hazel Court School, and they were both, at the time, the kids were labelled as severe learning disabled schools, SLD schools.
Right.
So we raised some funds, and then we did 2-week projects working with 80 kids in each school. In Hazel Court, we did first. We took in etching materials and casting processes using clay and sand. And I used acid baths out in the courtyard. I don't think you'd be able to do this. I bet it's so exciting watching You know, they sort of smoke and
Fizz
everything. We
and,
had to prime them. So there's drama involved. But the materials and processes needed to be able to give for the slightest movement so that the marks that were made were cast or captured and that existed just on the terms of the child who'd made them. And we valued them for that. And the works that came out were so expressive of individual differences, actually, and different ways of engaging with the world and materials. And we took casting again into Grind Gap School and did the same, but also started to use a large amount of paint. And then we exhibited the works at the Delaware the following year.
Really, so that early on you were getting the works out and having them viewed publicly?
Yeah. So, I mean, the point really of our work then and now is to be visible and to share this incredible dynamism.
Yeah. So out of that, I suppose you kind of realise the possibilities for formalising this way of working or structuring this way of working and for it to sit alongside your own practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's bringing art and life together, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was needed to be incredibly present for both my children, but especially Paul. And it's very hard as a mother to divide yourself up. And so I just thought, well, this is an interesting theme of inquiry. It was incredibly exciting seeing what would happen when you I suppose, exposed kids to an infinite variety of possibilities with creative materials. And so we set up what we charity in 2000 and, you know, then just sort of gradually evolved. But the principles still remain that given the right environment and the right, you know, kinds of relationships, people can make incredible things on their own terms.
Did you ever encounter any resistance to what you were doing?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, not from the kids themselves, but when the Delaware Pavilion has always been a good friend to us.
Yeah.
And so they showed up at that first exhibition, which was a really, I think, out there thing to do. Knocking on the doors of the temples of culture at that time with this proposition, no one was interested generally.
Because I suppose from our perspective in 2026, like it's extraordinary how far progress and kind of understanding has come of various types of neurodiversity. And it seems incredible how regressive it was even 10 years ago, but especially kind of 20 and 30 years ago, how little understanding there was. And I suppose how kind of siloed people with any kind of neurodiversity were within the system, both within the education system and kind of beyond there. There was this expectation that perhaps they wouldn't be able to achieve things or they wouldn't be able to be kind of integrated within a kind of a wider system of stuff. And hopefully that has changed or is in the process of changing seemingly quite rapidly at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the context over a quarter of a century within the cultural sector has changed radically. It's not necessarily reflected in all stratas of the cultural sectors, and certainly not within all stratas of society, you know, because we still actually at the time when we first started, we were pitched into this sort of parallel universe of disability, which is what it felt like. There was an opportunity to co-produce services, for example, support services. So we worked really closely with social workers and said, well, this doesn't work for us. And, you know, can you support us to do this? And they would say, well, okay, fine. You know, so there was a dialogue between the users of services and the people who were in charge of directing those. And
so was that, in that instance, was that almost a kind of a benefit to a lack of understanding that people didn't know how to kind of direct funds or direct help? So you could sort of say...
There was a bit of that.
This is how we need it to happen. And they were like, okay, go for it. Whereas I suppose as it got more formalised, maybe it's become harder for people to access certain types of help and certain types of support.
I think it's to do with funding. I mean, at that time, I remember being directed when Paul was 2, being directed to a local day centre as an option for him. And I mean, it was just not good, not good. It was really, well, I think about it now, my stomach turns over. So we knew at the time that we needed to see Paul for who he was, not as a person that was a composite of deficits. He's just an extraordinary, unique individual, and to personalize his life because the neuronormative world, he doesn't fit into that. And at that time, we had quite a lot of support to do that. I'd say the systems have become more adversarial.
Yeah, it certainly seems so from speaking to certain parents.
I mean, we had a fight then to get a statement for special educational needs like people, which is what the HCPs essentially were then.
So I suppose jumping forwards a little bit, Project Artworks now has this incredible gallery space, but you've also got your studios just a short distance elsewhere in Hastings, and you've got more than 40, around 40?
About 50, we work with about 50 neurodivergent artists, adult artists a week, and up to 90 children on average a year during our children's program, Art Breaks, which run during school holidays. And we have a young people's program that we're running at the weekend now, which is a slightly new model.
It's a huge community. So how many of the artists kind of, does it work in a kind of a traditional studio block model? Does anyone kind of hold space there, or is it all people coming in on a one-on-one basis?
Still evolving, actually. And some people like to work in I mean, we're very lucky, and it's one reason for being in Hastings, because you have this access to space, which is one of the reasons we're here and we stayed here. And so some people love to work in a group situation, and others want their own room. So we now have enough space to be able to give those
to have those two sort of things. And you've got these incredible kind of artist facilitators as well coming in.
Yeah, I mean, Project Artworks actually is a big employer of artists locally now. You know, we employ on a regular basis 20 plus artists.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and to support the facilitation of the right kinds of environments to enable people to make on their own terms.
And how does that kind of collective community, I suppose, feed into the work that's happening there? So you, like you said, you've got these community of artists, and presumably they all have some sort of input, some sort of role in kind of shaping what happens there.
Well, I suppose one of the things that we gradually understood was that environment is everything and has equal, I suppose, importance as relationships. So there is this way that the studios evolve where we understand what might be needed for someone to be creative and to have the freedom to be creative. And that is both environmental, I suppose, attitudinal, and about the quality of relationships around the individual. Was that the question you asked me?
Close enough. Well, no, I suppose I was sort of thinking about it's quite unusual to have a collective of artists running something.
Yeah.
Something that is, ostensibly a business, as a charity, but it's, it has to run along a certain formal lines. But I suppose it's sort of interesting to me, and probably interesting to other people, how kind of quite a large organisation now run by artists sort of works.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, it's not straightforward.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've toyed with different models. I mean, we're slightly chaotic, to be honest. And it's not only the relationships between non-neurodivergent and neurodivergent artists, it's the relationships that have been formed around the organisation. You know, like people who've been working with us for 20 years as artist facilitators whilst developing their own practice. Yeah. Because there's something deeply connected about the practice. And that is very sustaining. It's sustaining to, an artist as a human being as well as a creative entity. So yeah, I mean, we need to get better, I think, at enabling learning disabled artists to lead more. And we don't want to necessarily impose that on them, because it's, that is a sort of and kind of typical idea of success is to be a leader. But I think there are more ways in which supported studios like ours are beginning to enable artists to mentor each other. And that's an interesting development. And there's always things that are always areas of work that's evolving.
I mean, I think that brings us quite nicely onto what's happening here and in this space, this idea of kind of a progress. So we're sitting in Chris Tite's
Yeah.
exhibition here, which opens this week. And he started off in your Art Breaks program, is that right?
We're still trying to establish whether this is the case.
Okay.
I phoned the office this morning and said, "What did Chris Tite start in Art Breaks?" We go, "Well, I can't quite remember." So we're just working that out. But we've known Chris for quite a long time, certainly since he left school. And he's worked in the Tuesday studio program mainly.
Right.
And each of the studio days, they have a different sort of dynamic and different set of relationships. But he's always been a painter.
Okay.
And as you can see, you know, really quite confident with colour and
gesture.
Yeah. And so it was just lovely to think, well, we've got the space now, fantastic gallery space. We might as well begin doing some solo shows. I mean, it's a bit of a risk for us to take on a gallery, and it's not conventional. We're not doing it conventionally, like we never do anything particularly conventionally. But so we've had the space for, 4 months? About 4 months. And we've had 4 exhibitions. And so that's quite a fast turnaround. So we're just beginning to settle, and we will go on now until February at least next year, and we'll decide, we'll have reviews as we go. But what's really great is having the opportunity to maybe develop the curatorial practice of artists and makers.
So that's one of the things I wanted to ask you actually, is obviously you've got these artists who are making these works within the studio. Are they then involved in the kind of exhibition making thing, the selection of works, the display of the works?
Well,
or does it vary from artist to artist, I suppose, how involved they are? Yeah.
I mean, we have done that to an extent in previous exhibitions, but our programs have, a lot of the exhibitions have been off-site. You know, we did Copenhagen Contemporary last year and Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art the year before. And then there was the Turner Prize show in 21 in Coventry.
Yeah, Hastings Contemporary did as well.
Yeah. And so they were programs around mapping and addressing the communities of neurodivergent communities around those galleries as much as showing the work. So we would use the archive, because Project Artworks has amassed about 5,500 works. Yeah. And we have this fantastic database, which is just such a great resource for curating. So there hasn't been, and so those shows were about showing selection of the archive, but also using that as a leaping off point for connecting galleries with neurodivergent communities.
Yeah.
So now this show is the first one that we've done that's been really concerned with enabling Chris to be involved in the selection of the works that he likes and where they might go in the space.
Is there an idea or an ambition towards professional development, or this idea that you're creating opportunities for these artists that they can then maybe go forward and work
beyond us?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, completely, yeah. I mean, I think the big conversation since Nena Kalu won the Turner Prize, I think the conversation now is, what are supported studios? Well, they exist because art schools are very often closed to learning disabled artists, and that sort of traditional kind of pathway through to making a living as an artist is very often closed. Not that I think that's a straight trajectory for anyone.
No.
So supported studios exist like us, and Action Space and Venture Arts and Into Art and Art Riot, that they are there to enable the support and to support the mediation between the artist and the gallery. And so I think there will be much more receptivity, I guess, to this idea of artists having their own trajectory.
It's an interesting moment.
It's a really interesting moment, and it's been building for a long time.
Because obviously, you guys were nominated for the Turner Prize in 2021. Yeah, I mean, and that seemed like an incredible moment.
It was, and our work was for that, and has been. It wasn't necessarily profiling an individual artist. It was saying this group of artists here you know, they exist and they, you know, make incredible work. And obviously the Nanya's win is more to do with the artist as an individual practitioner.
Yeah.
And the art world gets on side with that a lot more, I think.
Yeah, and she's obviously got the relationship with a commercial
Yeah.
gallery. People can kind of understand it within that context.
The Turner Prize show, you know, we showed the centerpiece of that was a structure in which we could hold a large proportion of the archive.
Yeah, it was great.
And that has heft and weight. It's like this is an incredible body of productivity by a group of people who just aren't recognized in society and in the art world. And we had a film inside the structure. So that, I mean, those exhibitions, they're political acts as much as anything, I think. And so there's now this sort of relationship between that side of our practice and the individual artist development that we've always done, but I think it's taking a precedence.
So then if we talk specifically about art breaks, I suppose, in this context, so that's maybe for some of these artists and for their parents, a first port of call into sort of
I think
working with you, or
I mean the rationale for Art Breaks started in '98. It's our longest program, and you know, I suppose there was much that Paul, in some ways, Paul influenced decisions in some ways, because like at the time it was really difficult to get any respite care, and so during school holidays there wasn't much support, and so we were interested as a group of artists. We were just interested in creating a provision for kids to come along and to make work.
Like in a nutshell, what Art Breaks is, it's holiday kind of workshops.
Yeah, it's basically a family. It's aimed at families who have a child with additional needs and siblings and anyone else from the family who wants to come along.
Yeah.
And it's highly resourced in that we have maybe 6 artist facilitators for 6 individuals. And that means that when people start come into the studios, they can direct an artist facilitator in making work. I mean, they are wild sometimes, the Art Breaks sessions, because we don't say no.
Okay.
But what that does is that it suddenly enables an exploration of materials in a situation that can be completely surprising to even people who know that child well. And so it's always magical. They run in each school holiday period for about a week. We're just preparing between next week, 17th to 24th of March. We're doing a Big Give for Impact campaign to support the funding for the next Art Breaks programs.
So Big Give is a fund matching, donation matching scheme.
Yeah.
That means that anyone that gives within that period it's kind of matched. And how do people give? It's probably important to say that.
Well, there's a link on our website, and there is a link in social media, our Instagram account as well. And just to say that 7 Art Break days of creative sessions will be offering up to 188 places for SEND kids to make work and explore creativity. And it also provides opportunities for families to talk to each other and share intelligence about their experiences, which is so important.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the really incredible thing about this in particular is this whole family system. I think, as we mentioned at the beginning, like, so often care can be isolating for families and for siblings. I think, it can be so big to be able to bring those groups together.
Yeah. I mean, my daughter's a musician. She's a composer, and she made a new composition and piece, Hello Halo, last year about her experience as a sibling.
Really?
And performed it at the Aldborough Festival, and it's been played a lot. She worked with a choir, and it was about Paul's different forms and forms of language, outside language, his different forms of communication. It's a really beautiful piece. Her name's Ruby Colley. But I think that the family support we do comes out of the experience of going, is there anyone else out there who's experiencing this? Because it's so important that we walk beside people, and we run the support collective for that, which is a whole area of our practice where we provide advice, advocacy, free training to families as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, if we're kind of thinking about giving and support, I suppose financial support, how we've talked previously about kind of ideas of kind of support and patronage and how people can get involved with kind of organisations, sort of outside something like the Big Give. What are the ways that people might be able to kind of support what Project Artworks are doing in small and kind of larger ways? That kind of are there ways that people can kind of get involved? Or...
Yeah, I mean, we run a volunteer program. We recently have been contacted by people for legacy proposals. We obviously are receptive to donations, but also sales of work.
Yeah.
You know, as that develops, I think that we've not really targeted sales ever. There's an Untitled Gallery, and our online sales platform reflects what is going on in the organisation. So Chris's work will
be on there.
Yeah. But, you know, one of the things we try not to do is to equate charity with disability, because, and so it's quite a complex communications dilemma for us, because it isn't, I think that's one way in which the othering of disabled people needs to be slightly adjusted, so that it isn't about necessarily giving, but more about sharing, so that power dynamic isn't something that we want to promote. It's more about, look, if we can share resources, this is what can happen as a result.
Yeah. Is there? So this is just sort of coming off the top of my head now. I'm just thinking about the idea of putting value on artwork, but also on artists. If that is something that's kind of evolving now. That some of the artists that are working with Project Artworks maybe have this kind of pathway to kind of a form of professionalism. Does that in itself almost put certain pressures on the artist to sort of start thinking in those ways, as opposed to it being just like a safe place for them to kind of express themselves and mess around and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's
I don't want to kind of put a negative turn on that, because I don't think it is, but I'm just kind of curious about that as a dynamic maybe within the organisation, within the studios.
Yeah, it's a really, really astute point, and it's something that we discuss a lot with other supported studios, because first of all, people's lives are quite precarious if they have varying needs that might become more critical or acute at certain times and then level off at others. Care services are also precarious. Benefits are precarious.
Yeah.
And so if someone, for example, has success, then that, as you know, in the art world, is very feast and famine, but it may actually put them in a very precarious situation to be successful. And also, if someone doesn't necessarily self-identify as an artist, you know, it's quite a big term to apply to someone. So we're also quite cautious about that and work very much with the individual. If they're able to understand that, then fine. If not, then it's a matter of working with significant others in their lives. So there's multiple dimensions to this issue, and it's an ethical tightrope. And I think it's one that needs to be addressed and faced, both by supported studios, by artists themselves, and funders like the Arts Council, and also gallerists.
Yeah.
Because it's really significant. But if we all work together and continue, because it's new territory.
Yeah, and I think historically, transparency is not necessarily something the art world has been good at, I think. So I think it probably is important to have some of these conversations.
And it's fine. I mean, you know, these are interesting artistic and human dilemmas, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so it's really important to have those conversations, and especially now.
Well, as we were kind of, as I was sort of preparing for this conversation, trying to look a bit more into you yourself and your practice and kind of what you've done. And I was, I suppose, slightly surprised, given how long your career is and how much you have done, how little visibility there is for you and your, like, outside of the amazing work of Project Artworks, kind of you and your practice, wondering a little bit about how you kind of make space for yourself as an artist, and whether or not is that something you go through waves of thinking more about, or wanting to have more of an independent practice outside of the kind of both curatorially and artistically outside of the work of Project Artworks.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I haven't really invested in, say, my own website or collating my archive. And that is something I've just started doing. I've kept a thread of practice that I would regard as really deeply personal going over the last 30 years. But I think the difficulty is, how do you say what you've done with an organisation like Project Artworks is your own work? You can't say that. But what I would say is that I've put a lot of my practice into curating a set of ideas and events. I really like to make stuff happen. That's where my practice is.
So that kind of facilitating side of your practice, I mean, would you kind of group it in with kind of curatorial practice?
Completely. I mean, the curatorial energy of my practice is in conceptual connections.
Yeah.
And also obviously in putting exhibitions together. That is an absolute joy.
Yeah.
I love doing that. But I think what I've brought to bear on the development of Project Artworks over the last 25 years is this: I've never lost sight of the individual, which is at the centre of things, but also art and the power of art to change people's lives and the world. And so that has been my practice. But
then you've got a sort of standalone artwork practice. When we were talking earlier about your beautiful video pieces and these sculptures of installations that you've made.
Yeah. So watch this space. I mean, you know, women artists often come into their ascendancy later on. And so that's what I'm hoping might happen.
I think watch space is interesting. I mean, I think that's almost a whole nother conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Talking about kind of development arcs of women artists and things like that. Okay. Well, finally, I suppose what I wanted to touch on was, and you did touch on it earlier, this idea of Hastings as a kind of cultural incubator space, I suppose, and a kind of a cultural community.
Yeah, I mean, Hastings is going for the UK Town of Culture award, and I think it's an absolute deserving, winner of that if they were to get it, we were to get it.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's been possible to have space, and space is incredibly important. It's sanctuary, isn't it, for making. Certainly, Project Artworks has thrived, and we have the privilege of studio space, although it's more and more competitive, I think, locally, but still. And then Hastings has, it loves dressing up. Hastings.
It does. Loves a parade, loves a drum circle.
Yeah, but it also has, this fantastic, the seafront is really close to the sea. And I think that's a very strong, it's always been a spiritual support. And it has nature, corridors either side, like the hills. And
yeah, you're sort of immediately out into national parks very quickly. I think also, I think maybe something that perhaps separates Hastings from other coastal towns that have had a kind of a quick acceleration artistically is that Hastings has for a long time had an artistic community and a kind of quite a sort of counterculture, subversive artistic community as well.
Completely. And we're in the America ground, which sort of made itself independent from everything. It was to do with holding territory that wasn't determined by the states. And there's a strong. It's not pure anarchy, but there is a strong
it's independent
spirit.
Kind of counterculture, isn't it? And it seems like a place where you can get stuff done. I think if you've got an idea, you can get stuff done.
Yeah, and there's a really strong community spirit as well, because community is used as a word often with it being this amorphous thing that we all think of, but there is a really solid community here.
Yeah.
And I mean, during the pandemic, it was incredible what happened. There was a lot of community mutual support, and in Hastings Commons, Isolation Station was an independent radio set up that enabled connections to carry on all the way through. And we Project Artworks, we carried on the
Did you?
work. We did much of it online, but we also worked one-to-one with people out in the community. So yeah, it was. I think it's a really vital, creative, actually innately creative place.
Well, on that note, you know, here in 12 Claremont, we love sharing this building with you guys.
And likewise, it was always meant to be a ultra-inclusive creative hub, I think.
And it feels like it's turning into that.
Yeah.
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 Well, thanks so much for speaking to me again. This has been lovely.
Yeah, thanks, George.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It's been a real pleasure getting to know Kate a bit over the past year. She's someone with a huge generosity of spirit, and I think that comes through very clearly in both her own work and the amazing community she's helped build through Project Artworks. We're going to be releasing this episode to coincide with Project Artworks' Big Give campaign, which supports their Art Breaks programme. And Art Breaks is an amazing initiative which offers free, artist-led creative workshops for neurodivergent children and young people with complex needs and their families. The programme has been incredibly popular over the years and is often oversubscribed, and the funds raised through the Big Give week will help ensure that these sessions can continue over the coming year. During the Big Give, donations are doubled, so every contribution you give during this week has twice the impact it normally would, and I'll put a link to donate in the show notes. And if you're watching the video version of this conversation on Amici.Art, I've included 2 short films. The first shows Project Artworks artist Christopher Tite making the paintings for his exhibition in threes, which you'll have seen behind us during our conversation. And the second is a beautiful short film Kate has made called Mute. It's a silent portrait of her son Paul, just a close-up view of his face as the expressions pass across it. And watching it, you become very aware of how much emotion and communication can exist without words. Thanks for listening.
That was on holiday.